We are live on the page.
Awesome.
All right, so the page is live. So if you're watching on the page, hello everybody. Give me a second. I'm going to take this and share it over to our group so everybody in the group can join in. Well, I say that. We should be live on the group. So we're live on the page. I hope I didn't push
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, fingers crossed. You know what? It is bingo. Yeah, there we are. Perfect. Awesome. And let's go share this over to the group. Share to a group. And I want to share this to my group. Share the group. Let's go to church communications. And we hit, I'm going to say we're live with Robert. I'm going to tag you.
Awesome.
And we hit post and we should be good to go. All right. And here we go. Well, folks, thanks again for joining us for another episode of the Church Communications Podcast. I'm your host, Daryl Girardier, and today we have a special guest host, Mr. Robert Carnes, managing editor with the Orange Leaders Rethink Group, but also the author of a brand new book, The Original Storyteller, which we're going to talk about today. I'm super excited to talk about because I think it's a really unique book, and I don't say that lightly. We get a lot of books out there in our church communications space, but this is one that I'm really excited about because I think Robert has a very unique take. And it's a very unique topic. So Robert, from me and the group to you, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to come and speak with you. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's dive right into the book. So you write a book on storytelling, the original Storyteller.
Yep.
And if you see the cover, folks, you'll see it's a really cool cover with Jesus on the front of the cover there with the original Storyteller. That whole concept storytelling. When you're thinking through your mind, you're thinking, I'm writing this book. Give the audience overview, like 30-second overview. What is the book about?
Yeah. So, very simply, it's a 30-day devotional that walks through some of the most important principles of storytelling. So I dove right into, the Bible. We talk about it's the greatest story ever told. Well, I really wanted to investigate why that was. I wanted to dive a little deeper into what were those important principles of storytelling that made the Bible so great. And so each day breaks down one of those principles. It takes a great example from pop culture or literature or something like that we can all understand and relate to. And then it ties it back into scripture and then gives at the end of each day an action step that somebody can actually follow through and take to become a better storyteller.
Okay, so that's pretty cool because you've taken the concept of a devotional and an action step and almost theory and practice and kind of all meld it into one. And that's a really unique take. So what compelled you to write the book?
So I read a couple years ago when I was still working in a church ministry, read the book Created for More by Jonathan Malm.
Yeah.
And Jonathan actually wrote the foreword to my book. So shout out to him.
Awesome.
And so when I read that book, I was so inspired and loved the take that he had. You're saying it's a real original take. I kind of stole the idea from him of doing, a devotional that was specifically focused on creatives within the church space. And so I love that idea, and I wanted to find something that was similar in the vein of storytelling.
Got it.
And I looked around, did a little research, couldn't quite find the exact book that I was looking for. So, being a creative person, I was like, hey, maybe I'll go ahead and write that book myself. And I think I speak to many people when I said, I had long wanted to write a book. And so I just saw this as a perfect opportunity to do so. And so I just, again, delved into scripture, tried to find some of those things that, were related between the Bible and between the great stories that we have, within pop culture today. And then just, started putting pen to paper and made it happen.
So when you went through this process of writing the book, I'm curious, were there any big revelations for you as, you're the managing editor, so obviously you have to have a good grasp of storytelling, the English language, the whole 9 yards. Was there a personal revelation for you as you wrote the book that you had this moment of going, whatever it is, did you have a moment where you had a realization for yourself as you're going through the process of writing the book?
I think it confirmed a lot of the things that I knew. Again, that whole question of why is the Bible the greatest story ever told? I think it just kind of built upon that that question and
Mm-hmm.
really just kind of confirmed what we already know as Christians and as followers of Jesus. Every time I found a principle that I'm like, hey, this is something that comes from literature. This is something that comes from movies and all that kind of stuff. Again, that's our modern day stories. And I tried to find examples of that in scripture, and almost every single time, pretty reliably, I was able to find a story or a Bible story or something like that highlighted those principles. And again, the whole idea of the book is that God is the original storyteller, that all the stories that we're telling nowadays are simply coming from him. They're all inspired by the stories that he told at the beginning of time.
So when you look at story, when you look at creating stories, when we look at storytelling, if you would say this is a major component, like this thing ingredient has to exist in storytelling, what would be one of the main ingredients? You say, whatever it is, that's got to be there. What would that be?
That one thing I think is definitely got to be conflict.
Okay.
And I think one of the reasons why I bring that one up, and that's just one of the days within the devotional, but one of the reasons that's so important, I think, is often conflict gets overlooked, especially in the stories that we tell within the church. It's really easy to kind of overlook conflict and kind of move past it or downplay it. But without conflict, there's no story, right? Yeah. Conflict is kind of that fuel that moves a story forward. It kind of catalyzes. It's a catalyst for the characters to develop. And I think it also puts the climax and the revelation at the end into context, right? We don't understand what the end really means and the end result of the character going from point A to point B unless we see that the conflict that they go through. And so an example of that from my own life, before working at the Orange Group, I worked for the Make-A-Wish Foundation, the local chapter here in Georgia. Mm-hmm. And so, as you might imagine, a lot of great opportunity to tell stories as a part of that organization. Yeah. And also a lot of stories dealing with conflict, right? We grant wishes to kids with life-threatening illnesses.
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of opportunities there to tell stories about kids who had gone through some real trials and hardship. And it was easy for us, and I worked in marketing, obviously, so I'm doing a lot of the storytelling. It was easy for us to really focus on the wish, that end result, rather than the illness and the conflict that the kid was going through. And so we really had to be intentional about spending enough time talking about the conflict, letting people know why that was important, and then that put the appropriate context for what that wish really meant to the family. Because Make-A-Wish is a much different organization if we're granting illness or we're granting wishes to kids without an illness, right? If we downplay that conflict, it's a completely different organization. But by sitting in the tension a little while and letting that conflict build a little bit in people's minds, that really makes that story all the more powerful.
Why do you think it is? I'm curious. If we say that conflict has got to exist for stories to take hold and to capture people and also to be to be compelling, why is it you think sometimes we shy away from conflict? Because you're bringing up a really good point, and it's funny because one of the things that we personally with our church struggle with as we try to tell stories is people tend to shy away from conflict, or they want to put on that mask that conflict doesn't exist. So when we're filming a video, prime example, we're doing Easter and we want to get we have to get conflict. And so to get the right conflict, we had to interview 21 people to find 2.5 people they would actually give us conflict. Right. So why do you think that is? Why do you think there is this this pause of saying when you're telling stories to say, conflict, I'm gonna back off of that?
Yeah, there's tension there, right? And none of us really like tension in our lives. We really try to, most of us in the workplace, if conflict arises between you and a coworker, you kind of try to shy away from it naturally. I think that's just part of our human nature, fight or flight mechanism. So that's just kind of ingrained in who we are as people. But yet we have to understand that within a story, and within life in general, conflict is going to happen. It's inevitable. Yeah. And that's where a lot of the great stories arise from, right? There's plenty of moments of peace and tranquility in our lives, but the moments of conflict is when the storytelling opportunities happen, right? So a story is really, it begins when a conflict begins, and it
Right.
ends when that conflict is resolved. And
Yeah.
so those are the opportunities to tell, stories when conflict arises. And so, it's going to be that we have to kind of fight that natural tension to
Yeah.
shy away from conflict,
Right.
because then we're going to get the opportunity to tell stories of great impact.
So when you're looking at scripture, is there a story to you that's like, hey guys, this is a prime example A, like throw it up on the board. Like this is a great one of where you see conflict played out. That's a really good example of how conflict plays out well to make a compelling story.
Yeah. I think a great example of that within the Bible is the story of the prodigal son. And I think a lot of people obviously are really familiar with the story. They probably know what the conflict is there. But one thing that I find really interesting about the story is even the word prodigal doesn't refer to somebody who goes away from home and then comes back.
Yeah.
The word prodigal actually means wasteful with money, right?
Wow.
And so I think that's funny because it shifts our perspective on the story.
Yes.
Rather than thinking about, okay, prodigal, somebody who comes back home after going away, it's somebody, hey, it describes the conflict of the story where the son, took his father's inheritance, took his own inheritance from his father, and then went and spent it wastefully and basically dropped his life, to the bottom of the barrel.
Yeah.
And I love how Christ, because obviously this is a parable that Jesus is teaching his disciples, and that's just obviously another great example there that, God is a storyteller. Jesus used parables within Scripture. But, Christ is telling the story, and he makes sure to put in real tangible examples of how this son who's run away from home, like he's sleeping and eating with the pigs, right?
Yeah.
He's dropped so low. He's wasted all this money. He's in this point of real tension and conflict. And it's a huge internal struggle for him to finally buck up the courage to go like, you know what, I need to go back home. I need to see my father and own up to what I've done.
Yeah.
And he's probably going to hate me, but what, I really got to do it because I am just such in a dire situation. And when he goes home and the father obviously embraces him, slaughters the fatted calf, throws a huge party, like that ending to the story is that much more meaningful because we see all the process the son went through. We heard and felt his conflict. And so that's all the more meaningful when he goes home and his father embraces him, right? If we just heard the story of, okay, he went off and was kind of wasteful with money and then he came back home and kind of apologized, it wouldn't be as impactful. But because we see the full arc of that transformation, it really is that much more impactful.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting. Obviously, I mean, you're right. It's a total arc of, he goes here, goes down, you have him, and then up, and it's that arc, the hero's arc, if you will.
Yeah.
In terms of storytelling, I find it interesting when I watch a movie. How many movies, when I see they violate the principle you just talked about, is the reason why they're not good movies. Like you watch it and you kind of go, there's no conflict, or the conflict is not really, you don't root for the character because the conflict's not very well defined.
Yeah.
So you kind of go, I mean, great for the hero at the end, but then maybe you don't really feel that. When you look at churches and you were to say like, hey, churches, if you're telling stories, what is it you would say? What's the advice you give them as they look as they approach storytelling? Because I think every church I hear a lot of churches say, we need to be better. We need to be telling our story better. We need to tell better stories. If you were going to coach them, what's the one or two things you would say, hey, focus on doing X, or here's how you can be a better storyteller in telling your church's story?
Yeah, I think one great principle, again, another book chapter in the book, is all about the hero's journey. And so if you're not familiar with the hero's journey, you've probably seen it, even if you weren't familiar with it. I mean, it's this storytelling framework that's gone on since the beginning of time. I mean, it appears in different mythologies around the world. I mean, it's basically the idea that, there's a hero who's called to action, who has a mentor that, pushes them along and helps them kind of take on this adventure. And then the hero faces all sorts of challenges and he comes back on the other side, back into the real world as a changed man. Right. So, I mean, how many stories does that describe? I think Jordan Lucas talked about how he almost followed that hero's journey framework basically to a T. And so if we take that framework and we look at it, so many churches and organizations want to put themselves in that hero's seat. They want to make themselves the hero of the story. Right. And that's a little bit of a mistake because that kind of alienates our audience, right? We want to put them in the seat of the hero, and our organization, our church, our business, whatever it is, can sit in the seat of the mentor, right?
Okay.
We can help the audience, whoever that is, whether that's a church member, whether that's a volunteer, somebody who could be a potential visitor. We put them in the hero's seat. We lead them along a journey through challenges, through conflict, to the end of the story. And then, we're looked on as a wise advisor. I mean, look at all the great examples of mentors. It's Gandalf. It's, they're usually wizards.
Obi-Wan Kenobi, Yoda,
Exactly.
you go on down the line.
It's all those wise guys.
Yeah. So, well, let me progress to the next part of that, which would be, for me, is, so one of the conflicts I think churches have is actually capturing the stories, in terms of because I hear all the time, we need to be better storytellers. We need to capture more stories. And I'm always like, well, tell me where the stories are at, because, we don't, you've got to create some sort of mechanism. So what's some tips that you have for churches of how to collect stories? How do we as communicators best capture that? So the fact when the time arises, we need to tell a story, we've got the stories waiting to be refined and be ready to be told.
Yeah, that's always the hardest part, isn't it? So we can sit here and talk all day about these principles and theories of telling stories, but to actually get the rubber to the road, you've got to just start collecting stories and finding those from around your church and community. And I mean, I think one of the best, simplest places to start is create a story database, whether that's a Word document, whether that's a Google Doc, so that you can share it with your whole team. Just start collecting stories that are out there, because if you have a church or a community that has people in it, there are inevitably going to be stories, and you just have to look hard enough to find the right ones to tell. And so, start copying and pasting things that you get in emails. Start, grabbing those baptism testimonials that you show every single Sunday. Start, when somebody tells you an anecdote of how, this event really impacted their life, jot that down and then start adding it to this story database, so that when you're looking for a story to tell, because, so often we're looking more often than we're actually collecting. When you actually, the time arises to share one of those stories in your church, you've got a couple different options to look into, and you've got a couple things to pull from. But I mean, it takes time to build that up. I think another great way to do that a little bit faster and more effectively is recruiting a team. And whether that's other people who are on full-time staff with you, whether that's volunteers from around the church, just kind of train them a little bit of what to look for, what kind of information to capture, making sure obviously to ask permission from those people whose stories you're gathering.
Right.
As many visual elements as you can. Pictures are always great. Video obviously is fantastic. So, if you can start to kind of collect those things together and really have a kind of robust story database to pull from, then it's just going to make your job so much easier moving forward.
I agree. Yeah, one of the things that I got to give props to Alex Lyons, one of my people I work with, did was he just created an Excel sheet, and he basically started hitting up ministers via email and said, just give me your stories. And we constantly have to do that every quarter. We have to go back and forth. What I've always wanted to do, I just haven't had the time to build it, construct it, is I wanted to build an actual photo booth, but a video booth where people at any point can just jump in, hit a button, and they can record their story real quick, and then we could capture it in some way, shape, or format, and then turn around and figure out, okay, that's a great story. We want to take that story, we want to make it happen, and just put it in the lobby of the church and just call it the story booth. But anyway, that's a free idea. Anybody can steal that idea. We don't own it at all, so just feel free to steal that.
Oh, idea. That's awesome. That's the dream, isn't it?
Yeah, it is just an idea where you can capture the stories. I think those are all great ideas. Robert, as you're talking through this idea of storytelling, I think it's great what you provided here, because for a lot of us who, especially because we come from a design background, or a digital background, where storytelling is not our thing that we grew up on in terms of being a storyteller. The beautiful thing about church communications is so many of us come from just different places, and all of a sudden, and have a book that kind of unpacks that for you. I think is really, really cool. So I'm really glad you created this book. So folks, we're talking about the book, The Original Storyteller, been written by our guest host here, Robert Carnes. You'll be able to find the book on Amazon. We'll actually put a link in the show notes. We'll drop it down here a little bit after the broadcast is over for you to go grab a copy of it. I highly recommend you do that. He's come up with a unique, I think it's unique. I know Jonathan's done this before. Jonathan, Mom, we love you. But an idea where it's a 30-day devotional with some action steps for you to do. So again, I think it's really cool. We want you to check it out. So, and also you can go to, what's the website? Is it originalstoryteller.com?
Originalstoryteller.com. Absolutely.
Awesome. So you can check it out there as well. So Robert, it's so awesome to have you on here. Let's dive into, we got a couple stories this week, just a couple stories of going down, just 3 different stories. So I'm going to lead off with it. We're going to jump around here. I'm going to do the story first because I think it's out of all the stories, it's probably the biggest story. And that is Facebook is testing varying posts for media outlets, basically pages, if you will, in a separate newsfeed unless we pay. So basically, folks, it's what we've always thought was going to happen at some point, and that is your Facebook page probably won't get any traffic unless you pay to promote the content. We kind of knew this was going to come down the pipe. I kind of knew a couple of years ago when I had a chance to listen to a Facebook executive at a conference, and he kind of hinted at that was going to happen at some point because, as he says, we got to pay the bills, which I understand. So that's coming for us. So Robert, when you think about that, this goes back a little bit to the storytelling. Is, what are your thoughts on how churches are going to have to? Do we have to start basically creating a budget in our communications accounts to say, hey, we got to start paying for this? What do we do? How do we work? I say work around that, but how do we grapple with this? Because for a lot of us, this is our main way we communicate with our congregations.
Yeah. I mean, I think one important thing to note to keep people from panicking is that Facebook, I think, is only testing this out in a couple countries right now.
Sure.
And it's a very limited kind of test to make sure that, they've got all the bugs worked out. And so, sigh of relief, like it's not happening all yet at once.
Exactly.
But this is the writing on the wall, right? This is coming eventually. Organic post reach on pages has been kind of declining for a little while now. We've been learning that, hey, we can't rely on just, I'm going to post something on my Facebook page and everybody's going to see it. Yeah. So I mean, you essentially have to start being more intentional about actually paying to play on social media. I mean, it's free to sign up, but to really have an effective social media strategy, you've got to have a budget behind it. You've got to be able to actually invest some money to hope for it to be successful. But the good news is it's still such a good, bang for your buck. Like the ROI is great for Facebook ads. I mean, you can spend $50 and reach a couple thousand people, and you can target specifically who those people are. I mean, Gary Vaynerchuk keeps talking about, Facebook advertising is like the best marketing money you can spend right now.
Right.
So, I mean, you can still get a little bit of organic reach on your page, but I don't know why you wouldn't supplement that with a lot more social media advertising.
I agree. I think the other thing Kenny Jahng said in the comments when we posted the story in the group was, he said, if you haven't done it yet, you need to build a digital street team. And I think it's a great way. Yep. We talked about this, is that for us, let's get our high influencers on Facebook to be the people that when we post content, they know to turn around, take that content and share it in every outlet possible inside their Facebook news feeds, friends, etc., to push that out, to make that happen as much as possible. I think you're right. I think it does force the hand of Facebook advertising, but as we've experienced, and I think other churches have done it before, Facebook advertising, gosh, it's super hard to beat in terms of what you can do with it, especially if you've taken a little bit of time to learn how it works and functions. It's a fantastic tool. Story number 2, it looks like Twitter is finally going to crack down on those bots and all the crazy accounts, and it looks like they're coming up with new harassment rules. So basically, Jack, as he's known on Twitter, the CEO of Twitter, has basically said, hey, we've goofed up, and we've got Security Council and get Safety Council, and we're going to turn around, we're going to create all these new rules. And so they're going to put all these things in place. So that's great. But let's ask the question is, well, that, Robert, in your mind, does that make Twitter better, or is that one of those things where it's kind of like, great job, guys, but you still really haven't, create a platform by which people are going to engage by Facebook type numbers, if that makes sense?
Yeah. I mean, that's the real question, right? Is how effective are these measures going to be? Because I know it was, they had implemented these rulings that said that we're going to start cracking down on, some of the inappropriate behavior that some of their users were having. I think this was even like last year that they said these things were going to come. And then finally now, a year later, they're actually following through and saying, oh, okay, we're really going to take this seriously now. So that'll be the real question, is how it actually impacts like the day-to-day user and how like my experience on Twitter is going to change. I mean, hopefully it's going to be for the better, but that's the real question, is what it's actually going to look like for all of the users. And the other thing that I was wondering about is, I mean, it's, I think, a pretty big problem on Twitter, and it's good that they're acknowledging it and they actually are, at least in theory, taking action on it. But what are the other social media platforms going to do? They may not have this problem quite as bad as Twitter, but is this going to cause a little more change in some of the other social networks as well?
That's a great point. I did an interview with with the press a couple weeks ago regarding a house somebody who's running for Senate in the state of Tennessee. She's a Marsha Blackburn, and they asked, how do you feel about her, quote unquote, being censored and so forth by Twitter because she posted an ad? And I sat there and I said, the issue I have with Twitter is things aren't clear. And I said, on Instagram, if I don't see something I like, it's very clear what to do. Like, I hit a button, do this, and there you go. It's reported. And you can do it on Twitter, but it's just not nearly as intuitive. So I think you're bringing up an interesting point of, will this force other areas or other networks to do this? I think at some point probably it will, but who knows? Story number 3. Facebook is releasing, or they're looking at releasing, a second newsfeed. Think of it like an Explore tab, if you will, that you find on Instagram. They're testing this out. It's going to be on your phones. It's going to basically think like, hey, we think you might be interested in this content. It's, suggested content, if you will. So it looks like it's going to be a separate feed. It won't be in your main feed. It'll be like obviously another button somewhere they're going to put it. So this is going to be interesting. What do you think, Robert? Do you think, like, would this be something you're going to browse when you open up the app? I'm going to hit the Explore tab or whatever they're going to call it and just peruse through things? Or are you going to say, like, what, I've got my feed, I got it the way I like it, I'm good to go?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think it's really going to depend on what kind of content's actually there and how good their curation of the content is going to be, because it really boils down to user experience. I mean, that's why Facebook keeps making changes like this. That's why they keep adapting. And why, they've built such a huge user base, and now they basically have to retain all those, 2 billion active users that they've built up. They have to keep them engaged, keep them enhanced, keep them coming back. And so that's really going to be the answer to that question, is whether or not, I think everybody's going to try it out a couple times probably.
Yeah.
But it's, hey, how was my experience with this? Did this actually add anything, or was it just kind of meh?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think it doesn't add anything. I'd love to figure out how you get your church's content into that feed. Yes. So in other words, if somebody is in a zip code, do I have to pay to get into the Explore feed? So it's kind of something they kind of just stumble on, which will be kind of interesting to see how that plays out. So that's going to be, I think it's going to be kind of interesting to see how they do that. Again, will I hit the button? I don't know, because honestly, I don't hit many other buttons on that bottom of that thing. I don't hit the watch tab. I pretty much just hit my feed, and then if I need to go find a group, I hit the button to go find my group. So that will be curious how that all plays out. By the way, one thing I wanted to mention, going back to the whole Facebook pages and the whole killing of the organic reach. If you haven't done it, folks, now's the time for your church to experiment with Facebook groups. We've started doing it for our church. I highly suggest you do that. Katie and I had breakfast with a Facebook employee, and they kind of walked us through some stuff, and they basically said, if you're going to do something, go all in on Facebook groups, because that's where they're going to live. That's what they're going to do. So I'm telling you right now, if you're thinking of doing something for your church, start a Facebook group. If your ministry's if you that preschool minister who's always wants a Facebook page and you're like, no, you can't have it, give them a group, because that's going to be 1,000 times more effective than them doing a page. So there we go. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, that was what Katie's presentation at that church conference last month was all about, was the importance of groups, creating community at your church. And I mean, it really changed the way that I saw Facebook groups, and it's kind of shifted my way of thinking too.
And the funny thing you mentioned that is that I will tell you, I, for the longest time, never used Facebook. We do groups, and all of a sudden I had total reason to use it. And I'm on the app more than I've ever been on the app, based off of groups and how they use it. So yeah, you're right. Definitely find community. Well, we've got a shout out for the week. The shout out for the week is Katie, because Katie, folks, is on vacation, which basically means I'm going to be the parent of the group for the next week and a half. So I don't know how that's going to pan out. I'm going to be moderating along with the rest of the moderators because Katie's on vacation. So, we'll see how that goes. I'm a little nervous about that because she's usually really good at handling things like the group. So anyway, but Katie, enjoy your vacation. You deserve it. Get some rest because you've been working hard. So folks, once again, I want to thank Robert for being here with us. Check out his book, Original Storyteller. You can find it on Amazon or originalstoryteller.com. The link will be in the show notes for you to check out. So we really appreciate it. If you like this podcast, if you're listening to it right now, please rate us on iTunes. Please subscribe to us on iTunes as well. If you're watching on Facebook, share it. If you're on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. We'd really appreciate it. Until next time, have a great week, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye.